Welcome back, everybody, to day two. Good to have you back. We are, just to kind of remind everybody what we were talking about before, we covered philosophy yesterday and the importance of putting that always on top. Okay, the whys we're doing it and the what of content that we're doing. And then that is going to kind of help us as we pick our methodology and pick our tools and then apply it practically to our classrooms. So we're in the grammar tools section right now. We're talking about memorization tips. So if you remember the slides before, we played Which is Better, and we watched those two really adorable, and yet one was definitely better in terms of what they were memorizing. So this kind of goes along with that. And not just classroom teachers. I mean, I guess homeschoolers too, although you're not really, homeschoolers rarely have to do a showcase or something at the end of the year for all the parents to kind of show what you've done. So, so mostly for classroom teachers, go for substance, not fluffy cuteness. The fluffy cuteness comes hand in hand with the fact that they're kids. So as long as you're working with them, you already got that factor. So go for substance when you're having them memorize. Yeah. Start early and repeat daily. A repetition is so great to make it not work for really anybody. And you'll find that they will have it memorized even before you have it memorized. But then it's not even work. You don't have to necessarily send a bunch of memorization home as assignments for the parents, unless you're going to teach and train your parents first on how to do it so that it's not work for them too. Okay, but repeat daily. It's good to make a list of what you want your children to know. So I've kind of quickly jotted down my thoughts, and I'm sure you have your own. Some of you teach a single level or even a multi-age level classroom, but you are their teacher for all subjects. Others of you, especially if you're teaching older grades, may specialize in just certain subjects. But these are things then, if you're not teaching all these subjects, that you should be talking about with your faculty if you're on a staff, right? These are the things that we want our children to know. Who's going to cover these? And make sure that they all get covered. So we have our categories of theology. That should not just be set to whatever they learn in chapel and the pastor's responsibility, although hopefully your pastors are greatly involved in your schools. But also the teachers, we all can be teaching our children these things, and the parents. You can even practice with your kids for a week or two, something out of the catechism, and then send it home. Because then, other than a sheet so that the parents can follow along, all they have to do is say, go, to their kids, and their kids will do it for them, okay? Plus, that allows you, I know, how many of you are classroom teachers? Right? How many of you send home weekly notes, or this is what we're doing this week, or this is what your child learned this week, or this is what we're going to be covering? How much greater would it be to send the child home with an instruction saying, please just listen to this and just say when you're ready, or tell me what this is, or whatever. And then the child communicates what the child is learning through the child, right? Not to say that you shouldn't write notes home to your parents anymore, but we can have the children in this process almost helping the parents regain that education that they themselves probably didn't get. Okay, literature and history, poems that you want memorized. This year was our first year for CCLE that we did a recitation contest. And we started with the younger grades, younger ages, for a couple reasons. Number one, especially the itty bitties couldn't participate in the essay contest yet. Number two, we didn't want to bite off more than we could chew the first year, because there always is a learning curve. But the poems that we received back of these children, that they had memorized these poems and then recited it into a camera. And really, recitation in front of people is one thing. To just look at a camera and to be able to emote, that's not a very easy thing always to do. These kids did a wonderful job, and we are excited to share some of those with you tonight at the banquet. But have them memorize poems, prose, dates in history, historical speeches, grammar and writing, spelling words, parts of speech, punctuation rules. Obviously, I could go on and on. The point is that this list is so comprehensive. There is more than enough that we can have them memorizing and putting in there. We want it to be of high content, or we want it to be something that, remember, we begin as we mean to go. We have the end in mind, right? And so if we know that come 7th or 8th grade, when they need to have, these things in their head, when can we start putting them there? How about earlier when their brains are just like soaking up everything? All right. Use multi-age memorization. Many of you probably in your schools have some sort of like either chapel buddy system or sometimes even a reading buddy. Little ones love and emulate and look up to your older students. And likewise, the older students enjoy being a mentor and a leader. And when you have them memorizing together, which is a grammar level skill that they all can do, it's really beneficial both ways. Okay, the more you memorize, the better your mind becomes at it. You actually develop the capacity to memorize better, more copious amounts, and to retain it longer. This is why, the ancients, they of course had massive memories because their society was completely or almost entirely oral. And because it was oral, they didn't have it written down, it had to be passed through memorization and through repetition so that it could go from generation to generation. So now my kids are much older now, but these are old videos just to show you that everyone can memorize. This first one, this is Jordan. I believe she's 2 in this one. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. Let's try that again.
Jordan? Okay. What is Psalm 50:15?
Call upon you, day and travel. I'll deliver you. The years will go from 50.
Okay, and then this is Emma. She looks so sad in there. Her initial pose is not how she feels. I don't know why she's making that face. All right, and this is Emma, and I believe she's 4.
What is the Lord's Prayer in Latin?
Pater noster, quies in carne sanctificationem Avenia renum tuo, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in caelo et in terra. Param nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimedi nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimidimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducast into tyrannum, sed liberta nos amalo. Quia tuum et
Regnum.
et potestas et gloria in saecula. Amen.
Good. And what's your name?
Emma,
And how old are you, Emma?
4 years old.
All right, so music. Let's talk about music and chant and song tips. Music is one of the 7 liberal arts. Many argue that it is one of the highest of the liberal arts as it can be used as a grammatical tool. It has logical and mathematical structure and proportion, and it can create rhetorical beauty, which with sounds that transcend the soul. Using music as a grammatical tool is absolutely essential in classical education. Chanting and singing words and putting words to music create better recallability and long-term retention. Speaking or chanting with rhythm, but not necessarily a tune. Sometimes these are called jingles. These are also very effective. And I encourage you, because a lot of things, even if your school or you as a homeschool educator purchase curriculum, sometimes, the stuff is there, the content is there, but it's not all put to music. I know there are places where they put jingles to music and they put certain things to music, but you and I are classical Lutheran educators. We can put any of that to music, okay? We can put all of that to music. We don't need someone to put it to music for us. And we don't, even if you are not trained in music, even though if you can't plunk out a tune on the piano, right? You can even do something without a tune, right? A rhythm can work as a jingle as well, right? And you can speak it in a rhythm and you can put claps in it and you got yourself a jingle. So come up with songs, chants, jingles together. Sometimes if you have older students or sometimes even younger students, they can help you come up with the jingles itself. That reminds me to tell you, I was in a session several CCLEs ago with Janet Muth. Is there anybody here from Hamel? Okay. And she is a phenomenal music teacher, just phenomenal. And one of the things she said in that that she worked with when she was down at Memorial. They started at 6 weeks, I believe, was where Babyland starts. And she worked with all of the kids all the way through their program, 8th grade. And she would say that especially the little ones, but all the way through childhood, there's something about thirds. There's something about the third from C to E, E to C, that distance, that interval that children just really respond to. If you sometime have time and you want to listen to just kind of like the lullabies, they're almost all in thirds, moving thirds up and down. So add those thirds, especially the third and then the fourth, especially in C major, just start at a C and use E and F, occasionally G, and you got yourself a great chord and group of notes to work on to create a song. All right. And then you can also add especially if you're working with little ones, add hand gestures or even ASL signs to engage the whole body. Here are some great sources for songs to teach as a grammar tool. That I start with sources and then I kind of also mention just names of things that you can find mostly on the internet. So the liturgy in our hymnal is great because it is basically the Bible set to music. And almost always it is just a single note. It's not all in chords, so you can just kind of plunk out the melody and let them listen to it. We sang this yesterday in Vespers, didn't we? Did we sing the, or was that today in morning prayer? Morning prayer today. We sang the Benedictus, of Zechariah. And that is a long verse. And if you read it in the Bible, I mean, it takes, a good several minutes to just read through his song. But you can have that, little ones can have that whole passage of scripture memorized just by singing the canticle. CPH's Sing the Faith CD for the small catechism is a really good tool. I personally think I think they got a little too creative on some of the 10 Commandments with the melodies. It's just really hard to sing. Even as a singer myself, I'm like, I can't follow that. But, the idea is there though. So, okay, if that melody doesn't work well for your class, you can come up with a melody, right? And you could sing the faith that way. Any hymn in our hymnal, great way to teach the faith. You can memorize a verse a week with your family or classroom. CPH and a lot of churches pass these out to Sunday school classes, but they have a lot of scripture put to song, and I really like that many times they put the Bible verse in there as well. The Shirley Grammar jingles we talked about yesterday. I believe we talked about 50 Nifty and the Capitol song yesterday, President Sound Off. I get what I did with lesson plans in this one a little mixed up sometimes. So if someone's like, wait, what was that? Just stop me and I'll explain it. Okay. And then Classical Conversations has a CD with songs relating to history, math, science, Latin, and English. School Song Latin is really good for little ones like preschool and first grade before you start your formal Latin program, where it's just a lot of songs that you kind of get you used to the endings and pronunciation. This one's nice too because they actually have a classical side, and if you flip over the CD, it's a church Latin side for pronunciation. So depending on what your school uses, this one can incorporate either way. Latin ending chants. I'm borrowing this. Is anyone in here from Our Savior? Okay, so I was privileged to be on their accreditation team a couple years ago, and I can't remember what his name was, but he taught third grade Latin. I don't even know if he's there anymore. Is he still there? It was a male. No, third grade. What is it?
Oh, no, Klug.
Yes, Klug. Yeah. Is he still there or did he? Oh, okay. Well, he was awesome. I loved watching him. He had his class demonstrate for the accreditation team about a 25-minute recitation. I mean, the kids breathed, but other than that, nonstop of all these Latin endings and declensions and conjugations. And in the middle of it, because they were having a great time, but in the middle of it, they all of a sudden just go, amo, amas, amat, amamas, amatas, amant. Amo, amas, amat, amamas, amatas, amant. And there was, I love you, love we, he, she, it loves, ye, we love y'all, of they love, da, 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 da. It was just on and on and on. It was amazing. But there's a lot of things you can do with endings and chant that just kind of inspire kids to be like, hey, let's do more. Let's learn more. I mean, it literally was like 25 minutes. Do any of you have, like, did anyone tape that at any point in time? Like, does our Savior have that? Okay. You still do them. Okay. You guys should tape it this year. Like, later in the year when the classes got it down, that would be amazing to see. All right. Reciprocal jingle. Actually, jump up here. 21 subordinating conjunctions. I covered that yesterday in my lesson plan session. Were most of you there? Were most of you not there? Raise your hands if you were there. Okay, that's not most of you. All right, do it again. All right, those of you who are there, you have it memorized already, right? Yeah. All right. So there are probably more than 21, but there are 21 main subordinating conjunctions, and this marker doesn't work. And I'm going to write them down. If you want, you can write them down too. While I am writing this down, there's a lot of research out there that it's easier to memorize things if you've written it down than if it's like just handed in front of you, or even if you're typing it, that there's actually this kind of motor memory that goes into long-term memory. So keep that in mind. I mean, I know you have a lot to do in very short days, and you have more to cover than what you have time. So sometimes a handout is easier for kids. It just is. But when you can have them write it down, that helps them to memorize it more easily. Who remembers from yesterday what the next one is? Before, if, in order, then since, so that, then. Good. Look at that. Just one day of doing it. Excellent. How about next? Unless, until, when. Yeah. When, whenever, where, wherever, while. Good. Whenever. My handwriting is not usually this messy, but I'm trying to get it up fast. Okay, so the reason I have my older students memorize subordinating conjunctions is because they start subordinate clauses. What are subordinate clauses? Well, sometimes they're called dependent clauses. And basically, well, before I explain what a dependent clause, I'll do it now. A dependent clause has a subordinate conjunction plus a subject plus a verb. Now, it's just a simple formula. So if you say, because the sun shined, and you put a period there, what have I created? A fragment, right? And a fragment is a big no-no in writing, right? And when do kids start learning about fragments? Like kindergarten or first grade, right? Really early. Okay, so we're talking about grammar level kind of mindset kids, right? Now, they've never heard of any of this that I just said, but you want to teach them that we don't write in fragments, right? And how do we teach them that? What is a fragment? Well, it has a subject and a verb, but no what? Well, it has a predicate because the verb is the predicate. Good try. Subject and verb, but no complete thought, right? No complete thought. What does that mean for a 5 or 6-year-old?
It doesn't make complete sense.
What's a complete thought? That's all I thought. Because the sun shined. That's what I thought. It's a complete thought to me, right? That's a complete thought is a very abstract concept, right? That is really not concrete at all. Now, saying to somebody that if it's a fragment, it has one of these words and then a subject, that's the actor, right? The person, place, or thing doing something, and a verb, the action. Now, that's all concrete. So now we're giving the student concrete understanding of what a dependent clause is, or all by itself, what a fragment is. Converse, kind of on the opposite side, we have the independent clause. Well, the independent clause is just subject plus verb. All right, now, I explained yesterday the reason, this is one of the reasons right there. It's a great thing for them. Now they have a concrete list. They know if I have one of these plus a subject and a verb, I can see if I put a period there, that is a fragment, right? But it goes farther than that, okay? Because we have, as if you teach English and you teach writing, you have to teach something called comma rules. How many rules are there? How many comma rules are there? How many comma rules have you seen in books? 41, 37, 26. It's never the same in any book, but it's always a lot, isn't it? And you have to go through these rules and figure out how to get the kids to learn all these comma rules. I always taught 6 comma rules. That's it. And it covered every single situation of when we use commas. And I did it by structure. I did it by form of the sentence rather than each specific individual example, which is usually how comma rules are taught. So this whole list, I would have my kids memorize so that they would first of all understand what made up a dependent clause and what made up an independent clause, but also so that they could learn probably 9 or 10 comma rules all in one based on structure. So this word right here causes a lot of comma problems, right? Right? The infamous because comma issue. Is it supposed to be there? Is it not supposed to be there? Do I use a semicolon? No, don't ever use a semicolon. But okay, so here's the thing. If you put, this is the rule, that if you put a subordinate conjunction plus a subject plus a verb, in other words, a DC, before the IC, we always use a comma. Always, 100% of the time, no exceptions every time. If you do it the other way, we never use a comma, ever, none of the times. So right there, because comma, problem solved, okay? And kids like when it's simple and explanatory and easy in that it is clear, right? It's clear and there are no exceptions. So here's how the jingle goes. After all, and by the way, I just made it up. I just said, you know what, the kids need to know this. I'm not going to just say, here's 21 words, go memorize it for a quiz tomorrow. So we just said, okay, here's the rhythm. After all, though, as if, as long as soon as, because. After all, though, as if, as long as soon as, because. Before, if, in order, that, since, so that, than, though. And you have to do it that way because otherwise, people say then, and that's not a subordinating conjunction. Okay. Before, if, in order, that, since, so that, than, though. Welcome to Texas, everyone. Last one. Unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while. Unless, until, when, whenever, where, wherever, while. Notice, no music. We didn't have to find middle C on a keyboard. We didn't need a conductor. We would do this once a day. I would do it a couple times for a week, and they'd have the 21 subordinate conjunctions down. They also, at the same time, would be learning why we're doing this, right? And why it's important. Okay, so that's the 21 subordinate conjunctions. Reciprocal jingles, just an example from math, that dividing by a fraction is the same as?
Multiplying its reciprocal.
Right. That doesn't even have rhythm, but I would have that. I would say divided by a fraction is, and I would, in the middle of lesson, divided by a fraction is, same as, and so we would just play with it. So it doesn't have to be a nice rhyme or something with, definite beat or meter. 3 questions to solve algebraic questions, or algebraic equations. What is attached to my variable? How is it attached? How do I move it to the other side? So again, kind of like we talked about before with Socratic method, but just at the grammar level with Shirley, it's just question, answer to help students go from point A to point F in order and get to where they need to go. Okay, recitation tips. The skill of oratory is definitely honed at the rhetoric level.
Yes.
By then, teenagers typically, now you have your outgoing ones, everyone does, okay? But by and large, teenagers are self-conscious, nervous, and often uncomfortable learning the art of public speaking and discourse. It's because how often throughout their life in school or even in homeschool have they stood and said something in front of a group of people. In fact, let's take teenagers out of the mix and just put you, now you're of course teachers, but this is with an adult setting. How many of you would like to just come up here? Now, some of you would be like, yeah, I live for it. I live for being, right up here. But most of us, this is a skill that is learned over time. I am a huge introvert, huge. But I do not have a problem doing this because I've done it enough. I've had enough practice. I've had enough coaching and so forth. But teenagers, a lot of times, by the time I would get them, I had one poor boy who just took the F in speech class because he did everything else for me, but he would not come up to the podium and deliver. He just would not do it. He wrote his speech. He wrote his speech cards. He put in the rhetorical devices we talked about. He just didn't do it. And about third quarter, he finally got brave enough. He came up, and unfortunately it was a music stand because we couldn't afford a real podium. And he put his whole weight on it, and it went down to, and the class laughed, and he was mortified. And I mean, that was it. So now he's an extreme example. But my point with this story is what a good gift it would be to give all children recitation at an early age. Because most 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds and 2-year-olds and so forth they're oblivious to the fact that you should be nervous when you're standing up here, right? Now they may be wiggly and all over the place, but you can teach that and hone that. But they're not nervous. They're just kind of like, okay, this is what we do. But what we do in most schools and even in homeschool settings is we have them always where you are. And we have them in their desks. And I'm all for this, by the way. I'm all for desks and rows. I'm for them facing the front where the instruction is coming from. I'm for all of that. But that said, that's where they are all day long. So they get really good at being an audience, but they don't get really good at coming up and being a presenter. So recitation and memorization go hand in hand. Students should be taught, not all day long, but I think regularly in the classroom, they should be taught early to stand tall, in a tall, comfortable stance in front of their class, make eye contact, and speak clearly with good volume. And for you doing homeschooling, for those of you homeschooling, I did this with my 2. That's all I had. They can still get that practice with 2. You got mom and the other one in the audience, and they come up and they practice how to stand, and they practice how not to fidget, and they practice how to look and make eye contact. And eventually you can add gestures, and eventually you can add, vocal quality, and you can just bring these children so that by the time they're ready to actually really study rhetoric, they have some of these grammar level and logic level skills down. You can also start by modeling this skill to them. You can model the entire recitation. So we talked about a couple of slides ago, they're memorizing poetry, right? So maybe the whole class is memorizing poems, or maybe you're going to say, you 3 are doing this poem, you 3 are doing, depending on how many you have, right? All right. And so then you model it. So that means you got to memorize the poem too. Oh, yeah. All right. Then you sit in the class or at the kitchen table with them. And then you walk to the front of the classroom and you state your name and you state the title of the recitation and the author, and then you recite the piece. Then you thank the audience for their attention. You wait for applause, and they will applaud, of course, and you return to your seat so they can see how they're supposed to do it. Give them very short pieces to do, gradually increase them over time, and work on both individual and group recitation. Okay. There is something to be said about having to say it together. That's sometimes a little bit more difficult. Students can recite both items mentioned in the memorization section as well as some of the jingles and chants. For those of you using Shirley, even if you're just using the jingles, which that's frankly all I do too, I don't use the whole workbook stuff. You put the sentence on the board. After they have it down, have a student lead, right? They love that. And then they're the ones kind of on the spot, but leading the question answer flow, right? Okay, this skill can be started at home with toddlers and preschool age children. Once they're up and about, they can work on this. Obviously, we don't do this with crawlers yet, but once they're up and about, we can do this.
They want to do it.
They want to, yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Be patient and perseverant. It takes time, but it produces significant fruit long terms. And how many of you teach older students? How many of you would feel like if the teachers of younger children did this and then sent those kids to you, what a blessing that would be? Oh yeah, good. Okay, Socratic method tips at the grammar level. So the Socratic method is named after Socrates, and Alex Graff gave a great presentation on the Socratic method, and I think he has a repeat session either later today or tomorrow. So if you didn't catch it, you should catch it. It's a good session. By strict definition, Socratic method belongs to the dialectic level of the Trivium. It's based on asking and answering questions to stimulate critical thinking and to draw out ideas and understanding underlying presumptions. It is a dialectical method, often involving a discussion in which the defense of one point of view is questioned. One participant may lead another to contradict themselves in some way, thus weakening the defender's point. All right. Nevertheless, the idea of a master teacher asking his or her scholars a series of questions to lead them to truth, and that is kind of the more broad and frankly more classical definition of Socratic method, can and is most certainly an effective as well as a grammar level tool. Okay. So here's how I can't wait to get to this video in a minute, but one way we already talked about several times, the question-answer flow of Shirley English, and the 3 questions that I did right here are 2 examples of Socratic method at the grammar level. So asking a question, getting an answer, putting it down on paper, okay? Good classical teaching at the grammar level should include Socratic method frequently in lesson planning. Just because you're not wanting to engage the little ones on thinking about, deep definitions of faith and love and what these things, you're not working at that level yet with them. You can still do Socratic method with them regularly. Intentional advanced anticipation by the teacher. This is what makes it difficult. You have to think ahead of time what their answer is going to be before they give the answer, and how you can use that answer and your next question to get them where you want to go. Another way to use Socratic method at the grammar level is to review a story plot for literature and history, where you've already read the story and now you want to review the plot, right? Or you want to review the characters, or you even want to review the themes or the setting or anything, and you want to discuss literature, right? Especially at the grammar level. Well, how do you discuss it? Well, you can lead them through what you want to talk about with a story. So this is Emma. I think she's 3 in this one, and we are reviewing the story of Osiris.
My name is Emma and I'm 3, and let's tell the story again.
Okay, and what story are we going to talk about?
Osiris.
And what do we know about this story?
Pretend.
It's a pretend story. So
Yes, it's a pretend story.
yeah, don't talk in your hands or the camera won't be able to hear you.
Yes.
So take your hands down, ready position. Thank you. Okay, so a long time ago, there was a king named
Osiris.
and he came back from a long trip, but he had a naughty brother named I really can't hear, the camera cannot hear you when you have your hands in front. So say Set. Yes, and Set threw a big party for everybody and invited them, because he had a plan, didn't he? And after dinner he said, "Look, everyone, I have a coffin." And what did he tell the people?
If everyone can fit it, they would get it.
Yeah, whoever could fit inside would get it. And so some were
Too big and some are too small. And Osiris got it, and he refused to prove it.
just perfectly, didn't he? Yeah, and so he said, I win the coffin. And then what happened? Set closed the lid and
Threw it to the Nile River.
threw it in the Nile River. Yes. And who ran after it?
Do you remember?
We're going to keep going in a minute. Listen in a little bit. I've watched this so many times since then, and it's also something amazing. I didn't pick it up when I was with her and working with her on this, but she starts to take it from the story and the review of the story and apply it to, she has a question about the river and the coffin, and basically why the coffin ran away from ISIS. And it's because we didn't really live that close to a river, nor had she ever seen rivers and how they moved and boats and everything. I didn't pick it up at the time, but since then, it's very interesting when you do Socratic method that a lot of times what happens is children will start asking the questions too. So watch that as well.
ISIS.
Who's Isis? Okay, try his wife. Sit down, please. His wife, yes. Okay, we need to finish the story. We got to finish telling the camera the story, okay? So she ran after it as fast as she could, but when she got to the coffin, it was too late, because what happened? Osiris had drowned, yes.
Mommy.
Yeah.
Why did it was too late?
Well, because the coffin was in the Nile River, so it filled up with river water, and by the time Isis got there, Osiris had drowned. Yeah.
Nope, that wasn't what I was asking.
Why did the box swim?
Well, it didn't. It floated down the river. Okay, so let's finish the story, okay? So Isis was very sad.
Teacher fail right there.
Which is why the Egyptians say, even though this is a...
Pretend stabbing.
Right, they say that once a year the river stops flowing because it cried all its tears out. And then Isis wrapped Osiris up in cloth, and what's that called? A mummy, yes. And when she did that, Osiris
Came back to life again.
yes, and so this is why the Egyptians explain, even though it's pretend, that once a year the river floods with happiness and overjoy and joyfulness, right? It overflows with joy because Osiris came back to life. And that's the story. Go ahead and say, that's the story.
And that's the story of Osiris, even though it's pretend.
That's right. Say the end.
The end.
Other things I like about that, first of all, with observing this and being able to watch this, I'm like, oh, I missed it. And how often is that going to happen in our classrooms? And one of the great blessings, especially if you're in a school, of observation, right? Yes. I hope that helps you kind of think of observation, both peer observation, and when your headmaster comes in, that's not a time to be nervous. That's a time to really get feedback, because we all kind of miss those things because we're in the heat of teaching, right? We're in the moment and focused on, especially if you're doing Socratic method, where I need to go, right? And you just miss sometimes those things. The other thing that I loved about that is we also worked very early on about the difference between, of course, myth, but I use the word pretend since she was so little, and real, right? So that when we hear the stories of Zacchaeus, or when we hear the stories of Jesus coming back to life again, that's a real story. But Osiris, this is just a pretend story, right? And that Osiris doesn't make the river flood or not flood and so forth. So work on that with your children early on as well. Okay, direct instruction lecture. One of the fundamental tenets of classical education is that the teacher is the curriculum. This does not mean that we don't use books, okay? That's not what we're saying there, all right? But it does mean that the master-pupil relationship is expected, and it also means that, students fit into this one, no problem, right? But then this is you, right? You have to be, and that's what we mean by the teacher is the curriculum. It means you have to be a master of this stuff. Now, we've talked several times about not being there yet, right? So we keep working on that, but this is expected, right? That we got to know our stuff that we're talking about. All right, as mentioned before, we are working toward a classical education ourselves. So we expect to be a master. As such, progressive notions such as discovery learning, student-centered learning, and the like have no place in classical classrooms and homeschools. Students do not need time, or excuse me, do. Students do need time to practice independently what they have learned. However, direct instruction and lecture should be prominent in classical education. Now, this is not what we mean, and we won't watch much of this. This is not what we mean by lecture. See if it goes to it.
Now, I'm going to ask you this question. Why are you here? That is to say, why should we, all of us, want to study these ancient Greeks? I think it's reasonable for people who are considering the study of a particular subject in a college course.
Okay. College level, right? We're not talking about that for, that's not my slide. When we say lecture in our classrooms. Now, that lecture, actually, it's very interesting. So I encourage you at some point to go out and listen to the Yale lecture on the ancient Greeks. But that's not what we mean. There we are. What we mean, though, is that teachers should impart the knowledge, right? That's what we mean. We are the source of the information for their class, for the classrooms and for the homeschools. Okay, a few flashcard tips. I'm going to try to get through grammar today. One of the best tools at the grammar level is the flashcard. Whenever possible, especially as they get older, okay, I realize in the early years, their little fingers get very tired, right? And so we want to do most of our written work concentrating on penmanship and so forth. Not that you couldn't do a little bit of that with flashcards. But when possible, especially as they're older, have students make their own because of, as we talked about before, when they're writing it down, they're going to remember it better. Flashcards can be made for terms and definitions, money, time, measurement, vocabulary, phonics, sounds. Good ways to incorporate flashcards into your classes. Okay, flashcard blitz. The teacher reads one side of the flashcard. The students search through theirs in a mad, frantic dash with cards flying everywhere to find the correct answer. And the first one to find it gets a point. Okay? Running flashcards. Now, you have to make sure that you create a safe space to do this first. Establish a small loop or circle that a student can jog through. The student has to say the answer to the flashcard, but still keep running in the circle. This is great for younger children and boys. My children have renamed this. It is called Flashcard Dash. And they ask me for this even in the summertime. They're like, can we do Flashcard Dash? And so they literally, we live in one of those houses that has a natural, encourages kids to run in your house when you don't want them to run in, but we just do. So they start and I hold up a flashcard, and before they get past me, they have to say the answer. And then they run around while I flip it and so forth. So Flashcard Dash is fun. Actually, Faith, you might be able to use I don't know. All right, Flashcard Bingo. Create bingo sheets. What's that? Oh, yeah. I don't work here, so. All right. Create bingo sheets of paper with what? Can you imagine downstairs? What are they doing up there? We're learning. Yes. Okay. Create bingo sheets with paper on one side of flashcards on it. Read the other side, and then they have to mark their sheets. That's how you calm them down after Flashcard Dash. Flashcard mix-up. Put the flashcards that have an order to them on the floor out of order and have the child fix them. Okay, and so I did that right there with the numbers 0 through 10, but you can do that with other things as well. Did you get the picture, whoever was holding up camera? Okay. Good ways continuing. Flashcard fishing. You can line up flashcards on the floor, ask students to find the one for which you are looking. This is great for younger children. Around the world flashcard drills. I loved Around the World when I was in school. Okay, so this is just a one-on-one battle with flashcards as the content. Flashcard calisthenics. So instead of having your kids, now if you're doing 7 times 8, I wouldn't recommend this one. But if you're doing like just simple addition or subtraction, that's even better, right? What's 8 minus 5? And they can't say 3, they have to go like this. Okay. Again, don't use it for multiplication. Division's okay. Yeah. All right. Timed flashcards. That might be a good idea. You know how kids love multiplication over division, this will change it right there. They're like, we're going to do flashcard calisthenics. You want to do multiplication or division? Division! Okay. Finally, time flashcards. See how many flashcards students can answer correctly in a certain amount of time. You can post that up there. You can have like the record for your class. Finally, just good old-fashioned review, okay? All right, so lots of different ways. I have 1 minute left, and this is just a video of Emma going through flashcards and phonics. We might have time. Let me see where we are. Okay, good, we're right, good, yay, we did it. Let me see if there are any questions first. Questions, comments, thoughts. This is the end of the grammar section, yeah.
One thing I did do with my flashcards is we typed up all of our notes that we've been using through the year for science, say one of those, and we divided them into piles, and the kids came together and made flashcards for our Jeopardy.
Nice.
So it was wonderful because they wrote the question and they wrote the answers.
Nice. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, Jeopardy is, I love doing Jeopardy. There is, for those of you teaching older kids, there is a PowerPoint Jeopardy that you can get for free online. Yes, so you just search for it, Google for it. It's free, and you can type in the questions and answers ahead of time. It'll come up with all the categories when you click on them, and then go back to the main screen. It whites it out, that part. So, yeah, it's just single Jeopardy, but it's a great review tool. Yes.
What are your other 5 comma rules?
Okay, that is a great question. How about I do this? How about for tomorrow, when you guys come in, all 6 will be written up here, and that way y'all will come back tomorrow. Does that sound good? But I'll get those for you written up. I do confess the 6th one is my miscellaneous catch-all. So really, I only have 5 plus a miscellaneous. So I will get those up for you. Thank you. Anybody else have questions or comments or thoughts? Okay. All right. Hopefully we'll see y'all tomorrow and have a good last session after this one for today.